You are listening to the Small Town Big Talk Show, a weekly podcast for small town people with big ideas. I'm your host, Rebecca Undum, and each week we'll discuss a small town topic or idea to help you live big in your small town. I truly believe that small town living is amazing if we just choose to bloom where we're planted. My guest on today's episode is Lee Schwartz. Lee is the founder of a brand new business called Small Town Labs. And at Small Town Labs, Lee and his whole focus is to support small towns who understand and they get that they need economic development, but they don't necessarily have the resources to afford a full-time director, and they possibly don't even have their own chamber of commerce. In this episode, Lee and I touch on a lot of really helpful things for communities that are very small. And even though Lee is from Fargo himself, he has got an extensive background in both marketing and advertising, and he just brings a really fresh perspective and outlook, along with some pretty solid research as to why economic development really matters for small towns and how they can do that. So all the information that you need about Lee will be in the show notes, but please enjoy this chat with my new friend, Lee from Small Town Labs. All right. Hey, Lee.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm stoked to talk to you today.
I'm excited as well. I've loved the episodes I've listened to, and I would really encourage everybody who wants to be interested in small towns to watch your show, because it's been a very valuable time spent for me.
Well, thank you. You want to just come on every week and plug the show for us?
Your guest host, that'd be great.
No, it's really fun. So I actually like sometimes to share how my guests and I came to meet each other, because I just think that's always really fun. You are starting, or have recently, you'll have to kind of give us the background, a new business called Small Town Labs. And how you came to find me, I think, was in your search at the Secretary of State, right? At the state's website when you're looking for actually trademarking your business name, which is really fun, and I love it. So you reached out to me via email, and you were like, hey, I came across this is what I'm doing with Small Town Labs. And of course, I swear, if like small towns is in the name of your business, there's going to be some synergy between you and I. And it turns out there was. So I'm so excited to talk to you about Small Town Labs. So maybe touched on it a little bit in your intro, but why don't you tell us a bit about Small Town Labs, why you started it, what was the genesis of the whole thing, and then of course I'll ask you questions to keep you going.
Great. So it kind of started, it's funny, I have my own podcast. I did an episode, one of the very first episodes was, what would you do if you weren't working? And I had the idea for Small Town Labs quite a while ago. I did some work with the city of Holly, Minnesota, which is near here. And what they really needed is they weren't big enough to have their own chamber of commerce. They weren't big enough to have their own full-time staff member. But they certainly understood the importance of economic development. It's critical these days, and so many small towns are getting smaller and smaller, and not in good ways. And so everybody understands that economic development is critical to survival of small towns, but not everybody has the budget for it, and not everybody, certainly small towns, 2,000 or less, doesn't have a full-time person devoted to it. So they kind of hired me. I had been doing some marketing work on the side for them anyway, for the local bank, and the local bank president kind of brought me on. We formed an economic development committee, which I was a part of. I was the only one on the committee, not from Holly. But
my goodness.
We basically created a rebranding of the town. And I've worked in advertising agencies for almost 10 years and worked in marketing in several other ways. And so rebranding and building marketing plans was something I was very familiar with, but applying it to economic development was something that was new to me. And this is about 7 or 8 years ago now.
Okay.
So we went through a whole, the same things you go through with every marketing plan. You come up with a strategy, and you come up with a media plan and all those things. We did all those instead of doing it for a company, which I, like I said, was familiar with. We were doing it for a small town, and it's a very unique sales pitch when you're a small town, when you're trying to attract companies and you're trying to attract families, because you're not advertising to the local area. You're trying to advertise to a broad geographic area. So part of my work with the Holly Group, we created a plan, and it was called Hollywood, and it play on the name of the town, but it was Holly, WOULD. And so we built a website called Hollywood.com. And we had a whole bunch of billboards up in our key markets because we felt that was one of the better ways to reach people. And for a long time, that website was very successful. Hollywood, the theme was Hollywood be a great place to live. Hollywood be a great place to work. We kind of just played on that theme for quite a while. So then I kind of went on to some other things, some other careers, and the people of Holly carried that torch for quite a while, but they just recently came back to me and asked me to kind of revive it again. And so when they came back to me the second time and said, hey, we really need you to do this again because we still don't have any more structure in place than we did the first time around, it kind of, the light bulb went on. And it really occurred to me then that there's lots of other small towns out there just like Holly that, again, can't afford a full-time person, don't really have a chamber of commerce in place. Maybe they have a small committee, but even those committees and the council and the mayor and the city clerk and city auditor, all those people have the town's best interest in mind, but they don't have the time to do it.
Right.
Maybe they also don't have the expertise to do it. So I kind of founded Small Town Labs as a way to kind of bridge that gap for those small towns. I don't really have any hugely strong connection to small towns, other than when you're from Fargo, everybody you know is from a small town, and a lot of my relatives are from Western North Dakota and grew up on ranches. And so I spent a lot of time out there as a kid. But really, to me, it's everybody in America should care about small towns. Everybody in America should care how these towns are doing and that people are thriving there and not just struggling. So I wouldn't say it's just completely benevolent on my part, because certainly I'm hoping to make a business out of this as well.
Oh, certainly. Right.
But I do think small town, if the fabric of small towns starts to unravel, then we all unravel. So that's kind of where I came from on that.
Well, you and I are in complete agreement on that, of course, because I certainly feel that way as well. So many things I want to dive into. What a great, by the way, Hollywood is fantastic. I didn't know that's how you branded Holly. Holly is just far enough away from where I live where I don't see a lot of their stuff, right? I mean, in terms of what any marketing, or even if they did have a chamber, what they'd be talking about or sharing. But that is clever, Lee. I like it a lot. And I think it's really fun to think that the branding and the messaging had some longevity, that it lasted for a certain period of time. But so that leads me to my first question. What is the life expectancy of a community's marketing plan? As you think about working with the community, so I'm just thinking about the people that might be listening to this. So I live in a community, I live in Oaks, North Dakota. We are fortunate to have a solid chamber of commerce with a good number of business members. And we have an economic development group, and we pay a person to kind of manage both arms of that. They kind of are the point person for both of those organizations. So we have, as a community, invested the resources to put that together. I will still say, though, that doesn't mean that we have this, we do not have a solid branding plan for what our community should be. And that's actually something we're looking at right now in our community, because we need to be telling our own story. What you were talking about, it's a recruitment tool. Oh gosh, there's so many tangents. So I'm going to just say everything in my brain, and then you respond to whichever thing you want to respond to. Sure. But I think, when you and I first visited, I have said before that I think there is so much value in a community thinking about themselves as if they were a company that was recruiting talent. And what does our recruitment and retention, so when I think, because that's something that you haven't touched on, but I think is really important, is how do you create a quality of life for the people that currently live there that makes them want to carry that torch out to the people that don't live here, So all of those things are a piece of that. But I think as I'm thinking about the people that don't have the resources at all and maybe have zero idea where to start, where would you tell them to start? What is the importance of this, if you can think of anything outside of what you've kind of already laid out, of having a marketing plan? And then back to my first question, what's that longevity of a plan really look like? How often should a community be engaging with somebody like you to look at their marketing and their branding and their messaging?
Yeah, I think there's always two missions to economic development, and one is families, and then the second is business. And those plans are not necessarily completely on different paths, but they are dissimilar. So why families move to small towns or come back to small towns is largely for reasons either they have a connection there they can't avoid. A family member died and they're going to inherit the farm or the business or something like that. But a big reason is small towns are safer than larger towns. There's a perception that in a small town you'll get a better quality education. And, and part of the sales pitch for Holly, strangely enough, was that if you were from a bigger city and your kids couldn't even make the football team, they're going to probably make the football team in Holly. And other sports opportunities are more available in smaller towns and a lot of times that they are in bigger cities. And if you think those sports opportunities are a valuable part of the high school experience or education, that's something that was important to people. And the third thing is work-life balance. That there's a perception that there's a much better balance when you're working, and maybe every farmer will tell you differently, but there's certainly a perception that there's a better work-life balance in smaller towns. But what I found, and it's not just my opinion, it's the opinion of many people, that there's a term called disaffection that's affected a lot of small towns. And disaffection is defined by a feeling of isolation and a disconnectedness across a whole community. And in small towns, this frequently happens like after a major company employer leaves. I mean, it certainly happened in Detroit even, but I'm sure it's happened in many other small towns whose big manufacturing company left town, or a resource leaves, such as like the oil industry out in western North Dakota. When a lot of that shut down, a lot of those, not the Willistons of the world, but a lot of those other small towns shut down almost as quickly.
Right.
So ways to combat this disaffection that small towns are facing, there's really three different ways. And you have been very good about all of these, I think. So one is to revitalize the business community. So much of economic development, so much of it is marketing. Almost an equal part is just the energy. And I think that's what a lot of small towns are lacking right now. Like I said before, their city councils and mayor are already a little bit time-strapped. A lot of those people have full-time jobs in addition to their city responsibilities. So there's not enough energy and enthusiasm to carry a lot of these initiatives out. And then the second big part of combating disaffection is to revitalize the arts and the amenities in the city. And I know you're working toward that as well. And I just think it's such a big deal, because if you're going to recruit any business to your small town, you're going to be recruiting some diversity. And I'm not just talking in terms of race, but in terms of gender, in terms of age. And a lot of those people are fans of the arts. And those are the kinds of things that they already have a perception that they're going to have to give up if they move to a small town. So if you're able to keep all of those things, that's going to be not only just great for the community itself and great for the children and the members of the community, but great for recruiting as well. And the third thing, and I think this is, it's hard for me personally to come up with initiatives for this at this point, but social interaction throughout the community is vital. I think if you can't bring people together in a good, positive way, at least once in a while, it's going to be really tough to get things done. I think I've come across some city councils that are not only, like I said, they're busy already. They already got all the roads and all those other major priorities that don't allow them really to work on things like economic development. But they have the biggest concern that a lot of city councils have is, if let's just say they wanted to give a new company a tax break, or if they wanted to build a new business incubator for companies to utilize, that they would just get voted out, or they don't have the support of the community, or that city councils in small towns aren't strong enough anymore to make decisions on behalf of the population without more headaches than it's worth.
Right. No,
I'd love to hear your opinion of that.
Yeah. So, okay. So did you complete though so you had the three things to combat that disaffection, which by the way is a word I've never heard before, but I think is that's a perfect word to describe what can happen in a community. And I think what can just happen over time without any intentional or proactive strategies to keep it from happening. It's like just you can coast for a really long time, but at some point disaffection will happen if we're not being more proactive than that. So I love that. And before I respond to your question or your thoughts about city councils, because I've got some things I want to share about that. You had said economic development is two things, families and businesses. And you talked about the three things that draws, or the perceptions of small communities that draw families. Did you have anything specific for businesses that would draw businesses to a small town? Or do you have points or thoughts on that?
And there's two philosophies to economic development for small towns. And one is to try to go find that 20 plus person employee technology company or something similar. And the other philosophy that I think you and I kind of share this perspective too is that you are probably just as beneficial to bring in 4 or 5 small businesses as you are the large company. And so the large company has some benefits to it. But if you're going to bring in a larger building or large, like I said, a technology company or an energy company, there's been so much progress made for like STEM companies, which is science, technology, energy, and math-related companies. So like insurance companies and then like technology startups, things like that. They're moving away from the big cities. They're moving to smaller cities. And hopefully that migration will one day eventually lead to them also moving to even smaller towns. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to try to land one of those large technology companies, you're looking at having to improve your water, your sewer, your roads,
right,
housing, and your internet. And you don't necessarily have to have all those in place right now, but you need to be able to promise those to a new company that's coming. You'll also need to have to showcase the talent pool available.
Right.
Is there even enough people nearby to fill the positions that they need? And then convenience to airports, major roadways. I mean, that's a big deal for a small town to promise all those things. But if you bring in something smaller, and I think there's a couple different roads you can go down to try to enhance small business within a community. Like I mentioned earlier, that incubator program, and there's certainly some, renaissance zones and opportunity zones, things that have been created by government really to entice people to build businesses outside of the normal areas. And I think one thing that's really important, though, is, and this is the case with Holly as well. One of the first questions I ask them is, what relationships do you have with those people who have found success other places? Holly has a lot of graduates that have gone on to very high positions with major companies, Fortune 500 companies and technology companies and those kinds of things. They don't really connect with them, though, enough to entice them to think about, hey, come back to Holly and maybe start something here. It's like all of the entrepreneurs I know and all of the entrepreneurs I know that have found success always have that one idea that's in the back of their head that they haven't followed through on yet. That if something happened with company A, or if I sold out to Microsoft or whoever, I'm going to follow this dream next.
Right.
I think there's a big opportunity there for small towns to say, come back to Oaks, build that company here. And there's incentives set up for seemingly every other company, but there's no incentive set up for the alumni to come home.
Right.
Do the same thing. And I kind of find that oddly frustrating because it's never really been utilized. Because I do think I wouldn't call it the lowest hanging fruit, but it seems like an obvious choice to me that's not being utilized.
Right. You basically, it's so much fun to listen to you talk. Well, it's funny. You'll laugh at this. It's always fun to hear someone completely affirm the direction you're heading in. And you're certainly doing that for me. Just talking about these 3 ideas to combat disaffection through the revitalization of both the business community, the arts, the humanities, and then social interaction. That's exactly what I'm trying to build here. And it is not easy. And the whole alumni thing too is another big thing. It's a big initiative I really want to focus on because I think you're absolutely right. There is a group of people, a pool of people that exist outside of my small town and all small towns that have a connection to this place. It could be that their family actually still lives here, right? It could be that they just had a really wonderful upbringing and maybe they get to that place in their life where, like you said, maybe it's their career pivots in a direction where they think they are on to that next thing and they're looking for a place to start it, or family comes in, onto the scene. They get married or they have kids and those things like the safety of the community and the opportunities that their kids will have to get involved in stuff, all of those things that were never in the mind of a 20-year-old, right? At least not the typical 20-year-old. You're not thinking about those things when you leave your small town, or, you leave and you're 18 and you're going to college. I totally agree that those are the people that we need to be fostering relationships with, intentionally nurturing relationships with. And everything else you're saying too, Lee, it's crazy because I just think so much of it is just choosing to make it the thing that you say. I mean, any community can do the things that you were talking about, but nobody's saying this is who we are and this is what we want. Like, hey, alumni person that we've been nurturing a relationship with since you graduated in 95, we've got this building for sale, like we've got this building or this business for sale. Who do you know, or who in your network do you know? And so I love that this is your approach because it's very people focused. It's not like sexy and shiny object like. It's grounded in nurturing relationships with people and making it about people. I love
One
that.
thing I kind of ran into working with companies when I was doing marketing for companies was that they weren't able to tell their own story effectively because they were inside of it every single day. And you are working at company B and you are immersed in everything they're doing. You see too much of the bad stuff, not the bad stuff, the obstacles, I guess is a better way to put it. You see too many of the obstacles on a daily basis to be enthusiastic about the outcome or the opportunity that lies in front of you. And I think small towns fall in the same trap that certainly in every small town, there's a certain amount of naysayers that are never they don't want any economic development, to be honest. They want everything to stay the same. And but they don't realize that by doing nothing, things are going to get worse than they are now.
Right.
There's certainly a lot of risk to offering this big company an incentive or a risk to building a building or a new apartment building, but there's a bigger risk to doing nothing. And that applies to a lot of things in life, not just small town development. But
it definitely does. Yeah, it's one of my phrases with small towns. And again, this is more than just small towns. It's how I approach my own self as I move through the world, is that if you're not growing, you're dying. And growth doesn't necessarily mean hundreds of new people and hundreds of new businesses. It literally is about the energy, which is something you also touched on. Just what kind of a mindset do the people that live here, how do we think about things? Are we open-minded? Are we open to change? Are we open to new ideas? Are we open to new people? And those are the things I think every small town needs to consider, because anybody can point out the problems. I'm sure it's not that hard to say our population is declining. The census tells us, right? These are things that all of us can kind of see, but it takes a whole different mindset to then think, okay, well, what are we going to do about that? And how can we move some of these things within the confines of what we have, because we've got all the infrastructure things that you first mentioned we've got pretty well in place in my small town, right? But, to ask, like, could we recruit in a 50-person company? Honestly, no, we couldn't. Not just from a straight up physical infrastructure, but we don't have the people and we don't have the housing. And then our school, or the actual physical size of our school, it would be too small to support, potentially 100 new students. So these are all things that I think the traditional idea of what economic development is, that's why we need to start thinking differently about how do we grow some of the talents and the skill sets that are already living in our community? How do we find them, right? How do we nurture them? How do we mine them? And I think going back to the third point you made about combating disaffection is that idea of social interaction. I think, for me, and I'm going to test this, Lee, and maybe, in a year, you and I will come back to the show and I'll be like, it totally bombed and didn't work at all. It was a terrible idea, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I'm hoping to create a space where we can offer a variety of different things so people can find a place to plug in. Because, that's something too. This was my community. I grew up here. I left and was gone for about 10 years before my husband and I came back. And I felt like I didn't know what even is there to do in our community, like from a civic group standpoint, or, like, are there league sports that we could all get involved? Like, and where do you even find that information? It was completely almost an underground, like you have to know who the leader is of these things to even know. And I think getting some of that, those things brought out in a more transparent way and having it housed where people can easily access it. Even those things seem simple, but they make a huge difference to somebody that's new to your community. And again, they talk to people, right? I mean, if we're not our own ambassadors, then why would we expect to attract anybody else to the community if we're not proud and excited about where we live, and talking about it in a positive way? Why would we ever have the hope of attracting anybody else?
Yeah, and this is why some communities have kind of pooled their resources together with other small towns that are nearby, and it's called marketing the region. And it's really basically built on the philosophy that every small town has something to offer, but every small town also has a lot of challenges to overcome. And like you mentioned with your school system, that's a really hard one to overcome. If you brought a big company in, to not be able to school the children is a red flag, obviously. But every small town can overcome these challenges, and if sometimes it works better for small towns to work together. And it really, like Holly has a great golf course and is close to the lakes, but it doesn't have, it doesn't have everything that somebody would want. Oaks has, according to Wikipedia, has its own pool. It's got softball diamonds and frisbee golf.
Yes, sir, we do.
But there might only be one golf course in the whole county. And if you're going to bring in new people with some diversity, again, in terms of age and demographics and those kind of things, they're going to want golf. So when small towns are able to work together, they kind of overcome a lot of those obstacles. And they also overcome, like if they're able to pool the resources, they're able to overcome the benefits or overcome the cost to bring in new business. But they also have to have the understanding is that new business might not be in your city limits. So you really have to think collectively to make that work.
Well, and do you feel like you've seen that successfully done? Very much. I think, because what I really think is that it makes a lot of sense that that's how we would approach things. I think about our area all the time from that standpoint. And then I think about how competitive small towns still really are. And the idea that if we're competing with the next community over, let's say Lisbon, because they're not very far from us, that we're the ones, we want to attract them here. And I just think that some of that tension probably undermines the move towards a collective pooling of resources and sharing of ideas. And I wish that weren't so, but what do you think about that? I mean, do you think that's kind of a prevailing mode for I hate the idea of community leaders because I think anybody can lead within their community, but just as you've been working with small towns, do you think that that's something that, am I the only one that feels that way? That people tend to be pretty hover and cover about the stuff that they're working on and they don't want to share ideas?
No, I think you're in some ways spot on. I think and again, these are some of the things that small towns are going to have to overcome either individually or collectively to make things work. Like you mentioned, small towns are territorial. I mean, look at all the conflict they have when even they try to join schools together. And those initiatives are largely government mandated or at least government driven to get to the voting process. So something smaller, something that's not government driven, if this is a community driven project, does it even have a chance? And one question I'd like to ask you, and this is kind of off the wall, but even if you tried to form a community theater with other small towns, could you make that work?
I think so. I think the weird thing is that one community would probably still have to kind of take the lead, and that comes down to like, and I don't know. I mean, we have a community theater group here, which is amazing. We've got a lot of really cool things in our small town, but I think about, Lisbon, like if we reached out to Lisbon and said, okay. So the one thing is, I think that that's a really smart marketing tool just to get new blood and fresh ideas and fresh talent into the group. I mean, just instead of saying, well, of course, our community theater program is open to everybody, but actually saying, hey, Lisbon, will you promote this? Like through your channels, promote it through the chamber. We'll bring flyers over and we'll talk about it, being more specific than just putting it maybe into paper where people overlook it. because I think it really is about relationships, because I think we do that. We market most of our stuff to a wider population base than just our community. But I think it goes so much further when you get an actual champion on board in the other community. And that would be my take on it. And then when I'm thinking about the building I'm trying to get off the ground here, in terms of the renovation and who's going to use it, I'm going to find champions in other communities to say, what events do you want to see here? And then let's get them here. And then you commit to bringing people from your community to enjoy it. Because I don't think, when I think about growing small towns as a nonprofit organization, my goal isn't necessarily to grow the population of our community, but it is to get some sustainability, so we're not losing population year over year over year. And I would love to see us kind of mine the area communities for the people that are craving that energy that I think we're missing too sometimes. So I think it's a great idea. I would love to see us be more proactive about the intentional collaboration between our community and another.
Yeah, but you get some valid points though, because I know like with Holly, they brought in a pretty nice new technology company there, but the technology company only had space to build their new building just outside of the city limits. So that still rubs people the wrong way somewhat. But like I said, when I said about marketing the region and using kind of collaborating with other small towns to improve the region, which certainly should improve each town.
Right.
It should improve, like you mentioned, the workforce and the diversity and the arts. All those things should be better if the whole county is better.
Right.
But I think you're right though, that the marketing the region might play better towards, like, let's just say you want to build a housing development and make it a cooperative between the towns. Certainly the tax revenue from that housing is going to be debated. But certainly if you have three small towns that are near each other, building one appealing housing development that will be able to house the kind of people that are going to be needed to maintain a workforce, it certainly could be a collective effort. But a lot of the economic development is going to be, people are going to want it to be for their town, and they're going to want it to be, most of what we're talking about here is kind of related to bringing like one large business in and the effects that will have. But like we discussed earlier, bringing those small businesses back, I think, is hugely important. And I mean, there's so many good reasons for doing that. One is it makes your downtown look full, which is probably the best curb appeal you could possibly have.
Absolutely. Right.
So it makes everything look better. And part of my job too is to take that curb appeal and apply it to the online world. If you go to a lot of Google listings, like if I type in Crookston, Minnesota, a lot of times the first image I will see is a grain elevator. And if I'm thinking about bringing a new business there, I don't want to see, I don't want, no matter how much of a part of the fabric of the town that still is, I'm trying to bring change to the town. I'm trying to bring something that's 2019 to the town. And maybe that's not a very good first impression to make to an entrepreneur who's looking to bring a technology company or some other type of company to the town. But a lot of small towns either don't realize that's the impression they're making or don't have the resources to do that, which is where I'm hoping to be able to come in. But bringing a new coffee house or a supply store or some other amenity to downtown keeps people there. And it not only keeps people there for those businesses, but suddenly now I'm going to stop at the grocery store while I pick this other thing up. And, and so many towns lose their grocery store, and that's such a big deal to them. But at the same time, it's an Amazon world these days. And there's so many things that Amazon, and I don't mean to pick on them, I'm a big fan myself, but they've heard New York City, let alone Oaks, North Dakota.
Right.
So
yeah, and okay, so there's something that you're talking about that I seriously want to make a plug for anybody listening to this. If they can relate to any of what we're talking about, so it's two things. It's either from the acknowledgement that they need to grow businesses, they need to either have this kind of revitalized energy, and the acknowledgement that they just don't have the resources, right? Because I think what you just said, when it comes to the digital footprint and the web presence that each community might have, this is a really big deal. So what I want to touch on, I'm going to encourage them to give you a call and just at least, because I think you have an assessment, come back to that with me when I finish this thought, because I think I want to help people. We want to make it really easy for people, right? Like, what's their next step if if this means something to them and they think they need this. But what the whole idea of web presence. So I did a lot of research when I was like putting together the business plan for Growing Small Towns about the millennial generation, which they just get a terrible rap. Like, we don't really know them. We just go, oh, millennials. Like we, almost just with this frustration, basically anybody older than them acts like that. Well, in about 5 years, first of all, they're the biggest generation. They're going to be bigger than the baby boomers were. And in 5 years, they'll have the largest purchasing power of any generation. So they expect two things when they shop, basically. And so when we think about this from a small town standpoint, it's the same deal, right? They expect to be able to find what they need on the internet. So like you said, if they go to Google, Oaks, North Dakota, and they cannot easily find what they're looking for, they will just throw their hands up and be like, oh, forget this, And that may feel fickle to some of us that are like, well, what about just good old fashioned X, Y, or Z? We need both. Because the other thing that millennials really appreciate when they do set foot in an actual physical store is they want to be treated as the special person that they are. So they value that highly individualized customer service. And I think both of those things are things that you can help communities address. Because and this is where I get really hot, and you can tell I'm a little, like, my voice is going up and I'm talking faster. I get really passionate about this because I don't want our local, like the local leaders that have been in kind of their, like our economic development group or our city council. I don't want them to think that progress means that we're stomping all over what they've done. So to me, old fashioned and traditional does not equal crappy. And to me, progress and innovation doesn't mean they're not at odds. It's something to build on the other thing, right? So some of the stuff that makes small towns super appealing, all the things you talked about, safety, and when you walk into a store that they know you and they know what you like and they know what you need, those are things that are trends millennials will appreciate, but they're not going to know to even look at us if they can't find the information on the internet. So. Yeah.
There's some pretty interesting data related to millennials in small towns as well. There's small communities so last year, millennials were 2 times more likely to buy a home in a smaller community than a big city. And there's a couple reasons why. One, it's more important to them than many generations before them to own their own home. And 2 is they're the first generation to come along in a while that cares more about their home life than their work life. They're much more home focused than they are and personal space focused than they are career focused. And then the third thing is the stuff that they feel like they have to give up by living, if they move away from a big city, the stuff that they feel they have to give up, they're okay with that stuff. They really don't appreciate those things anyway. Like you said, going to a shopping mall means nothing to them.
Right.
So I think there's certainly some ground to be gained among millennials with small towns. But you do need to have, some of those amenities in place as well. Certainly, one question I was curious about too is, you mentioned you have good internet where you are, but how is internet in your area overall? Well,
I will make a little plug here for our local internet provider. So Dickey Rail Networks, which is part of, what's it called? Dakota Carrier Networks, which is a, large conglomeration that owns several broadband companies throughout the state. They have invested in fiber optic internet kind of throughout our whole county and region. And that is a significant investment. I mean, it's a significant investment, but the speed of our internet is fantastic for the most part. And I don't know, we'd have to do some research and see what the map actually looks like as far as where the fiber optic internet lays versus where it doesn't. But those are things that we as a community are not talking about enough. And I think it's really, really important. That's why, this idea of mine for the space, co-working is a part of it. People don't really get that around here, and I'm okay with that. But just to be able to say, we support non-traditional workforce, like freelancers and remote employees. That's another trend that we really need to be paying attention to. It's fascinating how many people can work for a company that's in Minneapolis or Chicago, and they can pick anywhere they want to live. So like you said, if they really are looking for these things that give them that work-life balance. Maybe they have their flashy job at a good company, a big company, but they get to pick where they live. And so if we're not saying, come here, what reason are we giving them to look at us at all? And I think your work is really important for that reason too.
It's really an odd dynamic that the same thing that's killing retail everywhere, the internet largely, is the same thing that could be a big opportunity for small towns, because the internet allows people to create and sell right from their front door. If you're an artist or a craftsman,
exactly.
a woodworker, graphic designer, even a musician,
right?
All of those things that you used to have to go to the big city to do, you can now do from home, including selling your product.
Right. Yeah, I know. It is a really, and I think some of it's just going to be a constant push to redefine the problem or reframe it, right? So Amazon, we can talk about Amazon. Amazon, like you said, Amazon hurts all physical brick and mortar. Like, it doesn't matter. It hurts New York City, like you said, as much as it, maybe not as much. I mean, I can appreciate that. But we need to start thinking, okay, so what can we do better? What are the things that we can do that bigger communities just can't? And another thing with millennials that I think is, and I didn't mean for this to kind of pivot that direction, but again, I'm thinking about the people that are listening to this and they're thinking, what do we do in our small town? Well, some of it is just recognizing that these are trends that work in our favor. These are good things for us to consider. And the other thing is that millennials really care about social impact. And man, if you run like that in the world, small towns are such a fantastic place for you to be, because everything you touch, it's big impacts, small things, small investments, I guess, either of time or of your energy, really can make a huge impact because you're impacting an entire community. So I think that's another thing, that we need to see as a really positive thing for us to recruit from.
But through Small Town Labs, what I'm hoping to provide is if there's a lack of a champion in town, and I certainly would consider you to be a champion for Oaks, and I'm sure other small towns near you hopefully have their own champion. And if they don't, that's kind of where I'm hoping to fill that gap. Because there's so much of economic development and really just small town growth and revitalization, like we talked about before, is so much about energy. And there's some opportunities out there. A lot of those opportunities for small towns these days are coming from a couple different verticals. One is energy sector, like wind towers and solar power. Those things have found pretty nice homes in small towns. The other thing is food production. An example I use is Impossible Meat. So Impossible Meat just showed up at Burger King last few days.
Yeah.
It's a meat substitute, but it's now served at every single Burger King in the nation. Well, Impossible Meat was just founded in 2011, and it was founded in Silicon Valley, so that's nothing special about that. But when you're talking about the production for these things, there's the same farmers that have been growing our food for 200 years could certainly be of this kind of food revolution we're going through, where people are looking for organic, people are looking for healthy. That production not only can happen in small town America, it really should happen in small town America. Like where I said, they've been growing our food for 200 years. And it takes people like you in these towns to have those ideas. It takes those alumni who have gone on to successful careers to come back to like I said, realize that unfounded idea, that idea that's still been sitting on the shelf. It takes those kind of people, those champions, to come back and to get that ball rolling again. And I'm kind of afraid that too many small towns don't have that champion left anymore. And, if you look at the demographic information, 24% of small towns are typically retirement age or older already. If you figure there's another 20% of the town that's under 18, you're leaving yourself a very small amount of people to come up with those dream ideas.
Right. Right.
So I love the fact that you're doing what you do, and I'm hoping to enhance that by what I'm doing. Because I do think that if you can just get that one entrepreneur in every town, you can save so many of these small towns just with that much effort.
Totally agree. And what a beautiful segue into, I'm going to ask my last question of you in just a second. But first, just tell the listeners, where to find you and what the first thing they should do is, if they think, man, I really like that guy, because they should really like you. I love everything you have to say about small towns, and the fact that you're filling this very specific kind of niche that, seriously, even like I said, even a community that has the resources that we do and the formalized structures in place, that doesn't mean we know how to bring it all together. You are doing something very different than what those individual organizations are even traditionally doing. So your work really matters, Lee. So to the person listening that's like, yep, we need Lee in our small town. Where do they find Small Town Labs, and what should they do first?
Well, and you're in a similar situation with your own business or your own nonprofit.
Yep.
I'm even getting the trade name approved. So the Small Town Labs is not official yet, but it still has a home, and that home is on my personal website, and that's leefromfargo.com.
Okay.
And we have
LEE, right? And of course, I'll put this in the show notes, but it's LEE from FARGO.com, correct?
Yeah, and the way that we're kind of kicking things off for Small Town Labs is that, just first the premise that everything is researched. If you're buying a new bandsaw, you're going to research it. If you're buying new fencing, you're going to research it. Everything is researched, including which small town you want to live in or bring your business to. Mm-hmm. So what we offer is really an assessment of your online presence and kind of a competitive analysis versus the other small towns you might be competing against. And that's usually a good place to kick things off, because a lot of the companies I work with and a lot of the small towns I work with are not even aware of the impression they're making, because either A, they just aren't marketing savvy, or two, like I mentioned before, they're just immersed in their small town. They think they're communicating well. They think that the impression they're giving is a good one, but they're not thinking like an entrepreneur. They're not thinking like a new family.
Right. Yeah. I think there's so much value in that. And I think it's crazy because I think a lot of times they say, well, we have a website, so we're good, but there's so much more. I mean, that's great. Like good for you, small town. You have a website, but is the information accurate? Is it relevant? Is it the kinds of things that a person that might be looking at your community for either business development or to move there, is it the kind of stuff they actually need to help them make a decision? And I love the idea of saying, like, how do we get them to say, this place looks like a place I want to be? And again, it's not like lying, and it's not exaggerating, and it isn't about sex appeal, right? But it is about telling a story, a compelling story of what they can expect. So I think it's awesome. Anything else you want to mention about kind of your assessment process?
No, in some of the services that we try to provide is like, well, I mean, again, it's a lot of it's marketing related, competitive analysis, going through all of your materials to make sure that you're making a good sales pitch to people. And then if you don't have the people to make that sales pitch, that's what I would also do, is make that sales pitch on your behalf. And I'm not going to try to be the mayor of the town. My job is to get the mayor of the town in front of that new company or in front of that new family.
Right.
That's how I see my role. But certainly, like, advertising, creative work, and photo shoots and social media is so important. I mean, and the thing is, nobody expects you to be the funniest Facebook page of any small town out there. But they expect to see some nice photos and expect to see the good parts of your town through your Facebook or Instagram page or those social media things. Because, I dealt with this a little bit with Holly. It's like they had nothing to tell a great story about their town, but you could always find an article about the last drug arrest there, or those kind of things that happened. And they don't even realize that if I Google Holly, Minnesota, and all I find are 5 articles about crimes that happened there, that could not be a worse indication of, or a worse impression of your town that you're making. So my job is to really make sure that that online impression is good, and then make sure that even the offline impression is good. And if you need to actively reach out to people, to do that. And if you don't have that person in your office to do that, I will fill that role as well. So.
Okay. Fantastic. So I like to end the talk show with every guest just asking, because it's called the Small Town Big Talk Show, because most of us, small talk is painful for a lot of people. And so we dive deep on this show, and it's really fun. And you've been such a fun guest. I always love to ask, what does living big in a small town mean to you? And I know this is a little tricky because you're in Fargo, and you and I kind of chatted. Fargo is still a small community, all things considered. But when you think about the people that you've supported and the people that you've helped, what does that mean to you?
I think part of it is living big in a small means not wanting for anything, that you'll be able to find happiness in the small town without FOMO, the fear of missing out. It kind of means that you're proud of where you live, you want to see your town and your neighbors succeed, and you want to participate in that happening. And
right.
rural America was largely just responsible for electing a president, and whether you believe in him or not, if rural America can elect a president pretty much on their own, then they really should be able to do so much more than they're accomplishing now. And I love that there are people like you working toward that goal, and I'm hoping to participate in that myself very soon.
Well, it is fantastic. I hope, listeners, that you reach out to Lee if you are struggling with some of these things in your small community, and at least get the process started. Start talking about these things. I always say, like you kind of said, you only need a champion. And a champion, you know what you can do? You can have coffee with a few people and ask a question like, what would, so I love like Hollywood, right? Like, what would Oaks look like if, or what could Oaks use, or what could our small town, and just start the conversation, right? It doesn't have to be as high level even as what we're talking about to start with. But if you care about your small town, these things are absolutely going to matter if they're not already impacting you. So Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really fun, really, really fun talking to you about these things.
I love the kind of conversation, love your enthusiasm. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for joining us this week on the Small Town Big Talk show. If you liked what you heard, we invite you to go to our website, smalltownbigtalk.com, and subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. You really want to go all out? Hop on over to iTunes and give us a rating. And be sure to share the podcast with all your other small town friends, because it's true. The size of your life is not determined by your zip code.